So welcome back again. In this lesson, we're going to talk about arrays in Swift. And arrays in Swift are actually rather simple. So let's jump into Xcode. And in here, I'm going to start a new project and I'm going to make it a command line tool. I'm going to call it arrays in Swift. And then in my arrays in Swift, I'm going to clear all of these. I don't need that. I don't need that. And I'm going to say var my array. And you could either directly define it by adding literal items to it, say hello, and then saying world, and that would become your array. Or you could actually choose it specifically to be an array of, let's say, a string. So then I know that this array is a string array. So let's call it a string array. Now, if I want to see an object from it, simply I'm going to say print. And what do I want to print? I want to print a string array object at index 0, for instance. And that would simply print hello in this case for me. All right. And once it shows up here, hello. And then I could obviously do things such as adding to an array. I could say strings array dot append, and what I want to append is iOS. And then of course I could get things such as strings array dot count, so that's going to print that value for me. So if I go ahead and run, you should be seeing 0, 1, 2, 3 elements in it. Perfect. You could remove objects. You could say strings array dot remove at, and I'm going to remove object that is sitting in the first one. And now if I go ahead and say print strings array, we can see that now we don't have hello. We should only have world and iOS. Perfect, the way that we expected it to happen. So while you can use a Swift array such as this one, which they can be annotated that they have specifically strings in them, you could also use NS arrays if you want. So if you want, you can say var my NS array, that's going to be an NS array, and then it's going to be an NS array dot init, and then I have all the familiar stuff such as init with objects, which I'm gonna say is going to be hello, and then also going to be world. There are some times that I prefer to use NS arrays as opposed to Swift arrays or literal arrays, and we'll get to see them as the time comes. I will actually, in a few sections from now, when I do a little game for you guys, I started with arrays, then I show you how NS array could actually benefit us in, you know, some of the stuff such as finding a certain item or removing a particular object. In those kind of things, NS arrays might be a little bit easier to use, even though arrays do all of those things. But, you know, NS arrays might offer a little, you know, simpler ways, or at least simpler for me, because at least for us, because we know Objective-C a little bit better now. But in saying that, arrays do almost absolutely everything that, you know, NS arrays do as well, and they do actually beyond. And one other thing that I want to show you is this print index of, say, world. So I'm gonna say print, and it is called strings array dot index. I'm gonna look for index of. What I'm looking for index of is actually world. So let's see what that one prints for me. So now when it runs, it should say nil, because world is not anywhere in there. So let's see why. That's because I actually made a mistake, and that's because here we removed the first object. So our array doesn't actually have world. So instead of world, if I look for hello, I could actually see this a lot easier. Now it's printing that it is an optional value at 0. Now, a much better way of doing this thing is using an if let. So I'm going to say if let, let's call it index, is going to be this value. If this thing actually exists, if let that, then print, for instance, hello is at, and then as you remember, we're going to do this thing. We're going to say it's at index. And of course, in the else, we could print it's not here, or something to that effect. So let's run this. And now it says hello is at 0. And if I was searching for iOS, it would say iOS is at, I think, 1 in this situation, and so on and so forth. So that's about that. You can use arrays as simply as, you know, declaring your array and give it its annotated explicit type. If you want your arrays to have all different types and you don't want to explicitly mention it, you can just drop this by its entirety, or you could just say any. So this array could accept any kind of value, let's say including a numeric integer value. And then in here, one of the challenges that we'll face is in here that you cannot invoke methods such as index for arrays that they don't have type when the type is any. To remedy a situation like this, we could either adopt an equatable, you know, protocol that we'll talk about sometime in the future, or we could use something like an NS array which doesn't have the type. Just like how NS arrays in Objective-C, they don't have to have types. They don't have to have type in here either. So with that in mind, that's about it. Arrays, adding, removing, counting, finding certain object, and explicitly telling them their type, or making sure that they are essentially typeless or they are any. And with that in mind, let's move on to our next level, next lesson, that we're going to talk about dictionaries.